The evening began as a typical high society gathering. The mansion stood grand and proud, its lights twinkling like stars against the darkening sky. Inside, the laughter of wealthy guests echoed through the halls as they mingled, talking about the latest business deals and celebrity gossip. The air smelled of expensive perfumes, and the sound of glasses clinking filled the space. Everything seemed perfect, as it always did in places like this. Clara, a young maid dressed in a simple black dress and white apron, moved silently through the room. She was barely noticed by most of the guests, who were too busy indulging in their luxury to pay attention to the help. Her job was to serve drinks, arrange hors d'oeuvres, and keep the place spotless. She didn't mind doing the work, but sometimes, like tonight, it felt like she was invisible. She had been working at the mansion for over 6 months, and each day seemed to blend into the next. The guests came and went, their faces always familiar yet unimportant. But Clara had always tried to do her job with grace, even when the world around her made it clear that she was nothing more than a servant. Her employer, Mr. Harrington, was the one person who made her feel the most insignificant. He was a wealthy man who had everything he could ever want: money, power, influence. And yet he often seemed to take pleasure in reminding the people around him of their place. It wasn't enough for him to be wealthy. He had to make sure everyone else knew just how much more he had than they did. Clara, in his eyes, was nothing more than a tool to be used when it suited him. Tonight, as the guests sipped champagne and discussed the latest stock market trends, Clara was given a task she wasn't expecting. She had just served the last of the appetizers when Mr. Harrington approached her with a smirk on his face. "Clara," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I think it's time you show our guests something more interesting than your silent service." He gestured toward the grand piano in the corner of the room. Clara felt her heart skip a beat. The piano had always been her escape, the one place where she could forget about everything, about the world that saw her as nothing more than a maid, a worker, someone invisible. But it wasn't something she had ever shared with the people in this house. She played it when no one was around, when she could get lost in the music and let her fingers speak the words she couldn't. Mr. Harrington continued, his tone casual, as if he were suggesting a light task. "I'm sure the guests would love to hear you play. Go on, entertain them for a bit. Show them what you're really made of." Clara's stomach turned. She knew what he was doing. This wasn't about showing off her talent. It was about humiliating her in front of everyone. He wanted to prove a point, to remind her of her place, to show the guests how easy it was for him to make her dance to his tune. She stood there for a moment, frozen. The music was her safe space. Her fingers had danced across the piano keys many times before, but never in front of people who saw her as nothing more than a servant. Clara had always kept that part of herself hidden, tucked away in the quiet corners of the mansion. But now she was being forced to expose it. The guests noticed the shift in the atmosphere. The chatter slowly died down as they turned to watch. Clara felt the weight of their gazes on her, each one judging, analyzing, waiting for her to fail. She could already hear their whispers in her mind. "She's just a maid, what does she know about playing the piano?" It made her stomach churn, but she knew she had no choice. She could either play or face the consequences of defying Mr. Harrington. With a deep breath, Clara moved toward the piano. Her legs felt heavy as though they were made of lead, but she pushed forward, knowing she couldn't back out now. As she sat down at the bench, the room grew even quieter. The piano's polished surface gleamed under the chandelier's light, almost mocking her. Clara placed her hands on the keys, but her fingers trembled slightly. She wasn't afraid of playing. It was the eyes watching her that made her nervous. She glanced up briefly, catching a glimpse of Mr. Harrington's face. He stood with a smug expression, arms crossed, clearly waiting for her to fail. His eyes sparkled with anticipation, as if this moment was a game to him. But Clara wasn't playing along. She wasn't going to let him break her. Slowly, she pressed down on the keys, a soft melody beginning to fill the room. It was a simple piece, one that she had learned when she was just a child. The music flowed from her hands, a quiet rhythm that was almost calming. But the guests weren't impressed yet. They continued to murmur among themselves, uninterested in the slow, delicate start. Clara's mind raced as she played. She felt the weight of the moment pressing on her, the expectation from the guests, the smugness from Mr. Harrington. But then, something changed. As she played, she began to lose herself in the music. Her hands moved more confidently, her fingers no longer hesitant. The notes began to pick up speed, the melody shifting from soft to vibrant, filled with emotion. She was no longer playing just for the guests or for Mr. Harrington. She was playing for herself. The guests, who had initially been indifferent, started to listen. They stopped talking, their attention now fixed on Clara. A few exchanged glances, surprised by the power of her music. It was as if the room had shifted from a space of judgment to one of awe. Mr. Harrington, standing just a few feet away, watched with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. This wasn't going according to plan. Clara wasn't faltering. She wasn't embarrassed. In fact, she was doing the opposite. She was captivating the room. The smug look on his face began to fade, replaced by something that looked more like irritation. But Clara didn't notice. She was lost in the music now, each note flowing through her as if the piano were speaking the words she had never been able to say. The melody swirled around her, a dance of sound and feeling. She was no longer the maid, the invisible worker in the background. In this moment, she was a musician, a person with talent and a story to tell. The more Clara played, the more the guests began to realize that they had misjudged her. Her talent was undeniable, and it was something that couldn't be ignored. They began to listen more intently, their eyes wide with appreciation. Clara's fingers moved with grace and precision, each movement telling a story that was hers alone to tell. It wasn't long before the sound of her music filled the entire room. Guests who had once whispered among themselves now sat in rapt attention. Clara's talent had begun to shift the atmosphere. It wasn't just about the rich and powerful in the room anymore. It was about the music, and Clara's ability to weave something beautiful with her hands. But as Clara played, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Mr. Harrington was standing nearby, his arms still crossed, his gaze locked onto her. She could feel his disapproval, even as the guests began to applaud softly. The thought of him turning the situation against her was always at the back of her mind. Still, Clara didn't stop. She kept playing, knowing that for this moment at least the music belonged to her. The room was still except for the gentle sounds of Clara's fingers pressing the piano keys. What had started as a reluctant performance now felt like something more. She was no longer just a maid at an extravagant dinner party. She was a woman with a gift, her music filling the air, surrounding the room with a feeling of quiet intensity. As Clara's hands moved across the piano, the guests began to listen, really listen. At first they hadn't cared much. Some had been whispering among themselves, barely sparing her a glance as she hesitantly sat down to play. But now the music had them hooked. The air was thick with anticipation, and the room's mood had shifted from idle chatter to captivated silence. One by one, the guests turned their attention to Clara. At first, the music was soft and simple, like a warm breeze. It was the kind of piece you'd hear played on a lazy afternoon, peaceful and calm. But as Clara's fingers grew more confident, the tempo began to pick up. She moved through the piece with a fluidity that was almost mesmerizing. Her hands danced over the keys faster now, as if the music had a life of its own, pushing her forward. The guests looked at each other, some with raised eyebrows, others exchanging puzzled glances. They had expected a clumsy, uncomfortable performance. After all, she was just the maid, wasn't she? She wasn't supposed to know how to play the piano, let alone play it well. But now Clara was proving them wrong, piece by piece, note by note. There was a quiet murmur among the crowd. Some of the guests had begun to nod in appreciation. Others were still skeptical, but all of them were paying attention now. Clara's talent was undeniable, and it was becoming clear that she wasn't the timid, invisible maid they had thought she was. Mr. Harrington stood off to the side, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Clara could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't let it stop her. At first, she had been nervous about playing in front of so many people, especially him. But as she played, the nerves began to melt away. The music was her escape, her refuge from a world that didn't understand her. She could hear the guests starting to whisper now, not the judgmental whispers she had imagined, but ones of awe. Who knew she could play like that? One guest murmured. I didn't think a maid would know how to play such beautiful music, another added, a little louder than the first. Clara tried to ignore them. She wasn't here to impress anyone, not really, but something inside her stirred. She had always been told to stay in the background, to keep quiet and out of sight. But now here she was, standing at the center of the room, her hands moving confidently across the piano. The music was hers, and for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of power. She played on, her fingers effortlessly moving from one note to the next. The melody built in complexity and beauty, filling the room with a sense of grandeur. The guests were no longer looking at her with pity or mockery. They were mesmerized by what she could do. The music told a story, one they hadn't expected to hear from someone like Clara. Mr. Harrington's expression had shifted. His smug smile had faded, replaced with something closer to frustration. He had expected her to stumble, to mess up. But Clara wasn't stumbling. Instead, she was taking control of the room, taking control of the piano. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering toward the guests who were now paying attention to Clara, not him. For a moment, he seemed unsure of what to do. Clara felt the shift in energy. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, and she could hear the gasps of surprise, the soft murmurs of approval, but she refused to let herself get distracted. This wasn't about them, it was about her. It was about the music that had always been a part of her, something that couldn't be taken away by her job, her status, or even the wealthy man who had tried to humiliate her. Her fingers moved faster now, the pace of the music quickening as she played a beautiful, complex piece. It was one of her favorites, one she had learned years ago when she first started playing. The music swelled and shifted, becoming more dramatic, more intense. Clara could feel herself getting lost in it, the sound of the piano filling her senses, drowning out everything else. For this brief moment, there was no one in the room except her and the music. The guests were leaning in now, captivated. Some of them were even standing, unable to stay seated as they watched her. The atmosphere had changed completely. What had begun as a simple task to amuse the guests was now something much more. It was a revelation. Clara was no longer a maid. She was an artist, a musician with a talent that was impossible to ignore. Even Mr. Harrington seemed to realize that something had changed. His earlier confidence had vanished. He no longer stood with the same smirk on his face. Now his arms were uncrossed and his gaze was focused on Clara, his expression guarded. He was no longer the one in control of the room. The power had shifted, and it had shifted in Clara's favor. She could feel it. The guests who had once ignored her were now paying attention, truly paying attention. She could hear the whispers, but they weren't the cruel, mocking ones she had feared. They were ones of wonder, admiration, even curiosity. Where did she learn to play like that? One of the guests asked. I never would have thought. She's incredible, another said, shaking their head in disbelief. Clara couldn't help but smile, just a little. It wasn't a smile of pride, but one of quiet satisfaction. She had always known she had something special, something worth sharing. But for so long it had been hidden away, locked behind the walls of a job she didn't choose and a life that didn't allow for dreams. Tonight, however, her music was breaking down those walls. It was her way of showing the world who she truly was, someone more than just a maid, more than just an invisible worker. The music continued to fill the room, each note more powerful than the last. Clara's hands moved over the keys with grace, her fingers almost as if they were guided by something greater than herself. The melody reached its peak, the room silent except for the sound of the piano, which seemed to echo in every corner. As the final note rang out, Clara's hands rested on the keys, her chest rising and falling with the effort of the performance. She didn't look up immediately. The room was quiet, the guests frozen in a stunned silence. Clara took a deep breath, her heart still racing from the rush of playing. Then the first clap came. It was hesitant at first, unsure, but it quickly grew into a full round of applause. Clara blinked, still a little stunned. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected anything, really. But the sound of the clapping was real, and it was for her. She looked up slowly, and her eyes met the eyes of the guests. There was no mockery, no judgment, just genuine appreciation. Clara smiled just a little as she stood up from the piano bench. The guests were still clapping, some even standing, their faces lit with admiration. Mr. Harrington's face, however, was a different story. He had been the one to force her to play, to make her the center of attention, but now he was the one being overlooked. His guests were no longer watching him. They were watching Clara. For a brief moment she saw him glance around, his eyes narrowing in frustration. as if the very thing he had wanted to control had slipped away from him. But Clara didn't care. She had done what she came to do. And for the first time, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just the maid in the corner. Tonight, she had shown them all who she truly was. And for that, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. The room was still buzzing with the sound of applause, but Clara barely registered it. Her heart was pounding, and she was standing there frozen in a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. For so long, she had lived in the shadows, overlooked and underestimated. Tonight, everything had changed in an instant. Her music had broken down the walls she had built around herself. It had forced the guests and even Mr. Harrington to see her, to really see her. And they were still clapping, still acknowledging something she had always kept hidden. Clara stood there for a few more moments, feeling the weight of their eyes on her. It was surreal, almost too much to take in. She wasn't sure what to do next. Should she bow? Should she smile and leave the piano? But before she could decide, one of the guests, a well-dressed woman in a sparkling silver dress, approached her. The woman had a look of pure admiration in her eyes. "That was extraordinary," the woman said, her voice warm and genuine. "Where did you learn to play like that? You have such talent." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. The woman's words were like a balm to her nerves, which were still trembling from the performance. She hadn't expected this kind of response. She hadn't expected anything at all, really. She had only played because she had no choice, but now the attention felt different. It didn't feel like judgment anymore. It felt like recognition. Clara gave the woman a small smile, unsure of what to say. "I taught myself," she replied quietly, feeling a sudden rush of humility. "I've always loved music." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Self-taught? That's amazing. You should consider playing professionally." "I can't believe you're not already performing in concert halls." Clara's mind raced. A professional musician? She had never even dreamed of such a thing. Her entire life had been focused on survival, on getting through each day, doing her work, staying out of trouble. Music had always been a small escape for her, a way to forget the harshness of the world. But now, hearing this woman speak, Clara felt a spark of possibility light up inside her. Could she really make a life out of music? Was that even an option for someone like her? Before she could respond, another guest, a tall man in a sharp suit, approached. "I have to agree with her," he said, his voice deep and thoughtful. "That was incredible. I never expected to hear such a performance at a party like this. You've got something special, miss." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Miss. It was strange to hear that word directed at her, especially from someone who seemed so far removed from her world. For a moment she was taken aback. How could these people who were so different from her be so kind, so appreciative of something she had always kept hidden? The man smiled, noticing her hesitation. "I'm sorry if I've surprised you. It's just, well, you've got a gift. If you're ever looking for opportunities to perform, I'd be happy to introduce you to some people in the music industry, people who can help you get started." Clara's mind was racing now. The idea of performing professionally was overwhelming, even frightening. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of change. She had lived her whole life in the background, unnoticed and unimportant. But here, in this moment, in front of these strangers who saw her talent, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something big, something that could change her life forever. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," the man replied with a smile. "We just want to see you go far." Before Clara could respond, the applause began to die down, and the guests started to return to their previous conversations. The mood had shifted, and Clara was no longer the maid. She was a musician, someone who had impressed the most influential people in the room. But as the attention turned away from her, she couldn't help but feel a bit lost. What now? Was this just a fleeting moment? A one-time thing that would fade into nothing? She had no idea how to navigate this new reality. She had never been the kind of person to chase attention, and she certainly hadn't expected to receive it tonight. Yet here she was, the center of a conversation that could shape her future. Clara glanced over at Mr. Harrington, who had remained standing by the wall watching the scene unfold. His face was unreadable, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. She could tell he wasn't happy with how things had turned out. He had wanted to humiliate her, to make her the object of ridicule. but instead he had inadvertently given her the chance to show the world who she really was. For a moment, Clara felt a rush of pride. She had taken control of this situation. She had turned his attempt to belittle her into something powerful. She had played the piano not for the guests, not for Mr. Harrington, but for herself. And in doing so, she had discovered something about herself she hadn't known before. A deep, undeniable connection to the music, a talent that was hers and hers alone. But as the night continued, Clara found herself slipping back into her usual role. She moved through the crowd, serving drinks and cleaning up just as she had always done. The guests continued to talk among themselves, but Clara could feel a shift in the air. It wasn't that they were no longer noticing her. It was that they were seeing her differently now. There was a new level of respect, of curiosity, and a quiet admiration in their eyes. Mr. Harrington had started mingling with his guests again, though he occasionally shot Clara a sideways glance. She didn't care anymore. His opinion no longer mattered to her. She had proven something to him and, more importantly, to herself. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing on equal ground with the people in this room. But there was something else she couldn't shake, a feeling that she didn't belong here. This was not her world. She had spent so long in the shadows hiding her talent and keeping her dreams small, and now suddenly the spotlight was on her. It was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. As the night wore on, the music and the applause faded into the background, replaced by the noise of conversation and laughter. Clara found herself retreating into the corner of the room, away from the guests. She needed a moment to breathe, to process everything that had just happened. Leaning against the wall, Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over her. She thought about the possibility of pursuing music. She thought about what it would mean to leave this life behind, to step into a world that seemed so out of reach. It was daunting, overwhelming, but there was a part of her, a small part, that felt a surge of excitement at the thought. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she was more than just a maid, more than just an invisible figure moving through the background of other people's lives. She was a person with a voice, with talent, with something worth sharing. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could make a life for herself in the world she had always been excluded from. But for now, she would hold on to this moment, the moment when she had played the piano not as a servant but as an artist. And maybe, one day, that moment would lead her to something greater. But for tonight, it was enough to know that she had stepped into the light and let her music speak for her. The night carried on, but Clara found it hard to shake the feeling that everything had changed. The mansion, with its grand chandeliers and polished floors, felt different now. It wasn't just the guests' attention, or the kind words they had offered her. It was more than that. She had stepped into a new world, one that had always seemed out of reach, and now she couldn't go back to the way things had been before. The very air around her felt charged, like something had shifted, something inside her. Clara went about her duties, her hands moving almost automatically as she served drinks and cleared empty glasses. But her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened when she sat at that piano. It wasn't just the applause. It was the way she had felt while playing, the way the music had poured out of her with such ease and grace. In those moments, she hadn't been the maid, the invisible worker in the background. She had been Clara, a person with a talent that deserved to be seen, a person whose voice could be heard. She glanced around the room at the guests. The conversations had shifted. The earlier casual discussions about stock prices and celebrity gossip had given way to talk about Clara's performance. Some guests were still praising her, recounting the details of her music, while others were discussing how they could help her. A few even mentioned contacting music agents, or offering her a chance to perform at their upcoming events. Clara had heard it all, but it felt unreal. It felt like a dream. In the corner of the room, Clara spotted Mr. Harrington. He was talking to some of his closest associates, but his eyes kept flicking toward her. She could see the frustration in his gaze. She could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface, though he tried his best to hide it. After all, he had tried to humiliate her, and instead she had taken the spotlight. The thought made Clara feel a strange sense of triumph. For the first time, she had turned the tables. She had taken control of the situation. Despite the small victory, Clara felt a sense of uncertainty creeping back in. As much as she had enjoyed playing the piano in front of the guests, the idea of pursuing a career in music felt overwhelming. What if it wasn't real? What if it was just a fleeting moment of attention that would fade into nothing? She had lived her whole life being overlooked and underestimated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to embrace a new identity, a new life, but something deep inside her told her that it was time for a change. The evening wore on and the guests began to leave one by one as the party came to an end. Clara was still lost in her thoughts, but she had to keep moving, had to keep working. She picked up her tray, clearing empty glasses from the tables. The mansion was slowly emptying out, and the sounds of conversation were replaced by the soft clinking of glassware. As the last few guests made their way out, one woman approached Clara, a smile on her face. It was the woman in the silver dress who had complimented her earlier. Clara had forgotten her name, but she hadn't forgotten the kindness in her eyes. "You were incredible tonight," the woman said, her voice warm and genuine. "I hope you're considering the offers we talked about. You really do have something special." Clara nodded, her throat tight. She hadn't expected to be approached again, especially not after the excitement had died down. She felt a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. I don't know," Clara said softly, her voice almost lost in the noise of the departing guests. "It's just hard to believe, you know. I've spent so much time in the background doing what I'm told. It feels strange to think about something more." The woman gave Clara a reassuring smile. "I understand. It's always difficult to step into something new. But you have the talent, Clara. You don't need to hide it anymore. Don't let fear hold you back from something that could change your life." Clara looked up at the woman, feeling a lump form in her throat. Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Clara had spent her entire life trying to stay invisible, trying to keep her head down, but now someone was telling her that she could step out of the shadows, that she could take a chance on herself. "I'll think about it," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman gave her a small nod and walked away, leaving Clara standing alone in the now quiet room. Clara looked around, the empty mansion feeling strangely foreign. The place that had once felt like a prison now felt like a world of possibilities. She had spent so long trapped in her role as the maid, always told where to go, what to do, and when to stay out of sight. But now, after that one performance, she felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, and she couldn't ignore the pull. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She turned around to find Mr. Harrington walking toward her. He looked tired. His shoulders slumped slightly, but his eyes still had that calculating look, the one that always seemed to be sizing up everyone around him. "Clara," he said, his voice cold but not unkind. "You played well tonight." Clara nodded, unsure of how to respond. The words felt strange coming from him. After everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if she wanted to hear anything from him. But there was a part of her that felt curious. He had tried to humiliate her, but now he was acknowledging her talent. Was it genuine? Or was he just trying to regain some control after his plans had fallen apart? "Thank you," Clara said quietly, her gaze not meeting his. "It wasn't what you expected, was it?" Mr. Harrington's lips tightened, but he didn't say anything. For a moment, there was a silence between them. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wasn't expecting that," he admitted. "But I'll give credit where it's due. You did well tonight, Clara. You've got something." Clara felt a wave of discomfort wash over her. She had spent so much time trying to get his approval. But now, after everything that had happened, it didn't matter. His opinion didn't define her anymore. "Thank you," she repeated more firmly this time. "But I think I'm going to take a different path from here on out." Mr. Harrington raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," Clara said, her voice steady, "I've always been in the background doing what I'm told. But tonight, I realized I don't have to stay there. I have something to offer, something more than just cleaning and serving drinks. I've been hiding it for too long and I don't want to anymore." For the first time that evening, Mr. Harrington looked genuinely surprised. His mouth opened as if he were about to say something, but then he closed it, clearly at a loss for words. Clara took a deep breath and looked him in the eye. "I don't know what my future holds, but I won't stay in the shadows any longer. I'm going to find my own way." There was a long pause before Mr. Harrington nodded, as if finally understanding something he hadn't before. "Well, Clara," he said, his tone softer now, "I can't say I blame you. You've got the talent. It's up to you to decide what you want to do with it." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing there, alone but not afraid. As the mansion grew quieter and the last of the guests left, Clara finally allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a choice. The future was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She was done hiding. Days passed after that unforgettable evening, but Clara could still feel the weight of it all. It had been a week since the party at Mr. Harrington's mansion, and everything seemed different. The house was quieter now, and so was she, but in a way, Clara felt more alive than she ever had before. The world outside had suddenly expanded, and it was hard to ignore the possibilities that had opened up for her. She found herself thinking about the offers the guests had extended to her, those kind words and invitations. But despite the newfound attention, Clara couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. She had always been a maid, a worker. Her life had been built around doing things for others, staying in the background and never asking for more. But now she had tasted something else. She had experienced what it felt like to be seen for who she truly was, not for the role she was forced into. It was exciting, but it was also terrifying. Could she really step into a new life? One where she wasn't just serving others, but living for herself, pursuing her own dreams? Every day she wrestled with that question. The music, the applause, it had all felt so real in the moment. But was it enough to build a future on? Could she really leave everything she had known behind? Take a risk and chase something she had never thought was possible? Clara had no answers, only the uncertainty that gnawed at her. She spent the next few days back in her usual routine. She woke up early, made breakfast, and then went about her chores around the house. But her mind was always elsewhere, thinking about the piano, the offers, the possibilities. She spent a little more time at the piano in the mornings when the house was quiet. It was the only place where she felt truly herself, where she could forget about the doubts and just play. One afternoon, as she sat at the piano playing one of her favorite pieces, the sound of footsteps interrupted her concentration. Clara turned around to see Mr. Harrington standing in the doorway. He looked different somehow, not as cold as he usually did, but not exactly warm either. "I've been meaning to talk to you, Clara," he said, his voice low. Clara stopped playing, her fingers still resting on the keys. She had no idea what he wanted, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had found her own voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. "What is it?" she asked, her voice calm. Mr. Harrington stepped into the room, his gaze moving over the piano, then back to Clara. He looked thoughtful, as if weighing his words. "You surprised me," he said, his tone softer than she had expected. "I thought I had you figured out. But after last week, I realize I don't. You have something I never saw before." Clara didn't know how to respond to that. She had always known there was something more to her, but hearing it from him felt strange. She simply nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I don't want to stop you from pursuing whatever it is you want to do," he said, his voice more sincere now. "In fact, I'd like to help." Clara looked at him, unsure of where this was going. Mr. Harrington had always been the kind of man who took what he wanted. He had humiliated her that night, and now he was offering to help? It didn't make sense, but there was something in his eyes that made her pause. "I don't know if I can trust you," Clara said, her voice quiet but firm. "You've never really cared about me. You only saw me as a maid." "I know," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I've been wrong about a lot of things, but I want to make it right. You're talented, Clara. You shouldn't have to stay here in this place doing something that doesn't give you the chance to grow. I've seen what you can do, and I don't want to hold you back." Clara's heart fluttered with a mix of emotions, caution, curiosity, and disbelief. She had never imagined Mr. Harrington would say something like this, but in a way she felt like she could trust him. There was something different in his voice, something real. "What do you want from me?" she asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. "I want nothing in return," he said quickly, almost too quickly. "I want to help you find your way. There are people I know, people who could give you the exposure you deserve. You don't have to stay here doing this job forever. You can have a career in music, Clara. If you're willing to take the chance, I'll help you get there." Clara was silent for a long moment. She wasn't sure if she could believe him, but the offer was tempting. She had always dreamed of more, dreamed of a life where she could play music for a living, where she could be someone who was truly seen and appreciated. But was this her chance? Could she really take it? "Why now?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. "Why do you care all of a sudden?" Mr. Harrington looked at her for a moment, his expression serious. "I think I've spent too much time looking at people like you and treating you like you're less than. But after seeing what you can do, I realized I was wrong. You're not just a maid, Clara. You're an artist." Clara felt a small sense of relief wash over her. It was a strange feeling, but it was there. She had always wondered if she was capable of more, if she could step out of the shadows. This was the first time someone had truly acknowledged her for what she could be, not just for what she was. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I've spent my whole life doing this. How can I just leave it all behind?" Mr. Harrington took a step closer, his voice kind. "I understand. It's not easy, but you don't have to make the decision right now. All I'm offering is a chance. You don't have to take it, but at least think about it." Clara stood up, her eyes still locked on him. "I will," she said quietly. "I'll think about it." Mr. Harrington nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Take your time. But remember, there's a world out there waiting for you. You just have to decide if you're ready to step into it." As he turned to leave, Clara felt a wave of mixed emotions. Part of her was scared, terrified even of stepping into the unknown. But another part of her felt something else, hope. She had always been afraid of dreaming too big, but now, for the first time, she could see that maybe those dreams weren't so far out of reach after all. Days passed, and Clara found herself thinking more and more about the offer. She spent time with the piano, but her mind was no longer consumed with doubt. She thought about what it would mean to pursue music, to step away from everything she had known and take a chance on herself. She wondered if she was brave enough to follow that path. The uncertainty still lingered, but one thing was becoming clearer. Clara wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who had something to offer, someone who had the power to change her own life. One evening, after spending hours lost in her music, Clara finally made up her mind. She knew what she had to do. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time she felt ready to walk it. She was going to take a chance on herself. The decision had been made, but Clara still found it hard to believe. Every day she told herself that she was ready, that she had finally taken control of her life. Yet there were moments when doubt crept in. Would it all work out? Could she really break free from everything she had known and take a chance on a completely different life? The next few days were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. She spent a lot of time alone in her room, reflecting on the choice she had made. Music had always been her escape, her secret passion. But could it be her future? Could she make a living doing what she loved? She didn't have the answers, but she knew she had to try. She couldn't keep living in the shadows. She thought about the people who had offered her opportunities, the guests who had been so kind after her performance. They had seen her potential, had told her she could go far. But Clara wasn't sure if she could believe them. All her life she had been told to be quiet, to stay out of the way, to accept the role that had been given to her. But now, for the first time, she was the one making the choice. And it scared her. The first step was the hardest, telling Mr. Harrington she was ready. She hadn't seen him much after their conversation, but she knew the time had come. She had to act or the moment would slip away. She couldn't keep waiting for things to magically fall into place. She had to take the leap. One morning, Clara found him in his office going over some papers. It felt strange to be there, to be speaking to him as if their relationship had changed. But everything had changed. He had offered to help her, and now it was time to make the decision real. "Mr. Harrington," Clara said, her voice steady, but her heart racing. He looked up from his papers, his brow furrowing slightly as he noticed the seriousness in her tone. "What is it, Clara?" he asked. "I've thought about what you said," Clara replied, standing tall despite the nervousness inside her. "And I've made my decision. I'm ready to try." For a moment, Mr. Harrington said nothing. He simply studied her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice sincere. "You've got what it takes, Clara. You've always had it. You just needed to see it for yourself." Clara felt a small spark of hope at his words, but it was quickly followed by a sense of fear. This was real now. She wasn't going to turn back. "When do we start?" she asked, trying to sound confident. "We can start right away," Mr. Harrington said, standing up from his desk. "I have some people I want you to meet. They can help guide you, get you where you need to go." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath. It was happening. She was taking the first steps toward something new. Over the next few weeks, Clara's life changed in ways she hadn't imagined. She started meeting with music agents, producers, and musicians who had been friends of Mr. Harrington's. At first, the meetings felt like a blur. They talked about contracts, performances, and goals for the future. Clara had never even thought about these things before. She had spent her life focused on getting through each day, never imagining that she could make a career out of her music. But as the days passed, she began to feel more and more at home in this new world. The people she met were kind, encouraging, and genuinely interested in her music. They didn't see her as a maid or as someone who had no future. They saw her as a musician, as an artist. It was strange, but it felt good. For the first time, Clara wasn't apologizing for who she was or what she could do. She was embracing it. One afternoon, after a meeting with a well-known producer, Clara sat in a quiet cafe reflecting on everything that had happened. The cafe was cozy with soft music playing in the background. She had asked for some time alone to think, to make sense of the whirlwind that had become her life. Her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea as she gazed out the window. She had a lot to think about, but for the first time in a long time she felt clear-headed. She thought about the performance at Mr. Harrington's mansion. That moment had been the catalyst for everything that had followed. If she hadn't taken that chance, if she hadn't gotten up to play the piano, where would she be now? Probably still stuck in the same cycle of doing what she was told, staying in the background. But now everything felt different. She was different. The door to the cafe opened and Clara looked up to see a familiar face. It was the woman from the party, the one who had complimented her so sincerely. Clara smiled as she recognized her. "Clara," the woman said warmly, approaching her table. "I didn't expect to see you here." Clara motioned for her to sit down, grateful for the company. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. It's peaceful." The woman nodded, sitting down across from Clara. "I'm glad to see you're taking the steps you need. I've been hearing great things about you." Clara smiled shyly. "I'm still figuring it all out." "It's all so new," the woman smiled kindly. "It will get easier, I promise." "You've got something special, Clara. You're going to go far." Clara's heart lifted at her words. It was hard to believe at times, but the more she heard it from people she respected, the more she started to believe in herself. She had the talent, the drive, and now the support. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But Clara was learning how to face those challenges head-on. "I'm starting to see it," Clara said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I think I'm ready. I just have to take it one step at a time." "That's all you can do," the woman said, nodding. "One step at a time. And remember, you're not alone. There's a whole network of people out there who want to see you succeed." Clara nodded, grateful for the woman's encouragement. The words felt like a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't in this alone. It was easy to feel overwhelmed, to think that she was just a small part of a much bigger world. But she was starting to see that she could make a difference. Her music had a place in the world, and she wasn't going to hide it anymore. That evening, after she said goodbye to the woman and walked home, Clara found herself thinking about everything she had accomplished so far. It hadn't been easy, but each day had brought her closer to the person she was meant to be. She had faced fear, doubt, and uncertainty, but she had kept moving forward. As she sat down at the piano that night, she played not just for herself, but for the future that was unfolding before her. The music poured out of her, a reflection of the hope and determination she felt inside. She wasn't just playing for the guests at a party anymore. She wasn't playing to prove anything to anyone. She was playing because it was who she was. And for the first time, Clara knew that the journey ahead was hers to shape. It wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for it. She was no longer a maid in the shadows. She was an artist, and her story was just beginning. Clara's life seemed to shift with every passing day. The rhythm of her days had changed. No longer was she caught in the routine of serving others, of simply going through the motions. Now every morning brought a sense of purpose. She had a plan, a goal, and a growing sense of hope that was foreign to her. It wasn't just the music, though, that was the biggest change. It was the way she started seeing herself, not as someone in the background, but as someone who had something important to share with the world. The weeks after that cafe meeting had been a blur. She had met more people in the music industry, and while the meetings were often overwhelming, they felt like stepping stones to something much bigger. Clara had been introduced to a few local music studios, and though the people there were kind and encouraging, she still had moments where doubt crept in. Could she really do this? Could she make a living, a career, out of something that had always just been a hobby, an escape from her everyday life? The first real break came when a well-known music producer reached out to her. He had heard about her through Mr. Harrington's connections, and after listening to a few of her pieces, he was interested in working with her. At first, Clara didn't believe it. She had never imagined that someone like him, someone with real influence in the industry, would take her seriously. But he did. Clara agreed to meet him at the studio, her heart racing with both excitement and anxiety. She had spent so much time dreaming about moments like this, but now that it was happening, she wasn't sure what to expect. The studio was big and full of sound equipment she didn't understand. It was overwhelming, but the producer, a man named Alex, was kind and patient with her. "Clara," he said after they exchanged pleasantries, "we've heard some of your work, and I've got to tell you, I'm impressed. You've got real talent, but we need to see more. Let's record something together." Clara was stunned. "You want me to record?" she asked, the reality of it all hitting her. "Yeah," Alex replied, his tone casual but confident. "Just play what you know. Don't worry about being perfect. We're just going to get a feel for how you sound." It was both terrifying and thrilling. Clara had never recorded in a professional studio before. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she had come this far. There was no turning back. When she sat down at the piano, her hands felt like lead. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her nerves. The studio, the microphones, the producer, it all felt so foreign. But then, as her fingers touched the keys, something clicked. The music came back to her. It always did. It was like a part of her was released, and she could hear the notes flowing from her fingers, expressing everything she had kept inside for so long. Alex listened intently, nodding as she played. When she finished, he didn't say anything at first. Clara looked up at him, unsure of what to expect. Was it good? Did he think she was terrible? Finally, Alex smiled. "That was great, Clara, really great. We'll work on some things to polish it up, but you've got something here. People are going to want to hear this." Clara felt a wave of relief and joy rush over her. She had done it. She had played in front of someone who actually understood her music. And more than that, he thought she was good enough to work with. It was a moment she would never forget, one that solidified her belief that she was on the right path. Over the next few months, Clara threw herself into her music. She started recording more tracks, working closely with Alex and his team. Each session brought new challenges and new lessons, but Clara embraced it all. She learned more about the technical side of music production, about what went into making a song sound just right. And with every passing day, her confidence grew. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was an artist. She was someone with a future, someone who had found her voice. During this time, Clara kept in touch with Mr. Harrington. Though their relationship had started with a moment of embarrassment for him, it had evolved into something more genuine. He had continued to offer his support, introducing her to new people and helping her navigate the music world. And while Clara wasn't sure what she thought of him personally, she was grateful for the role he had played in her journey. But with success came complications. Clara's new life wasn't without its obstacles. As her music gained attention, she found herself dealing with new pressures. There were expectations, and with those expectations came criticism. Some people in the industry were kind, but others were quick to judge. Some questioned her background, her lack of formal training, her sudden rise. Clara heard whispers about her, both positive and negative. She tried not to let it get to her, but it was hard. She had spent so long fighting for her place in the world. Now that she had it, she felt like it was fragile, something that could be taken away at any moment. But Clara was determined. She had worked too hard, fought too much to let anyone take away what she had earned. She couldn't control what others thought of her, but she could control how she responded. And she was learning to let the criticism slide off her shoulders, focusing instead on what mattered: her music, her passion, her growth. One evening, Clara was at home in her apartment, sitting at her piano, when she received a call that would change everything. It was from Alex. "Clara," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "I've got a big opportunity for you. There's a music festival coming up, and the organizers want you to perform. It's a big stage, a huge audience. This could be your chance to make a real impact." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "A music festival?" She had dreamed about performing in front of a large crowd, but the reality of it was daunting. She'd only just begun to find her confidence, and now she was being asked to perform for an audience that could change everything for her. "I don't know, Alex," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for that." Alex's voice softened. "Clara, you've been ready. You just have to believe it. This is your chance to show the world who you are." Clara thought for a moment, the weight of the decision sinking in. The fear was still there, but so was the excitement. This was what she had worked for. This was the moment that would define her. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I'll take the chance." Over the next few weeks, Clara prepared for the festival. It wasn't easy. There were long hours of practice, of fine-tuning her performance, of battling self-doubt. But every day she grew more confident. She realized that this wasn't just about playing music. It was about showing the world who she was, who she had become. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was Clara, the artist. The day of the festival arrived, and Clara felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. The stage was larger than anything she had ever imagined, and the crowd was massive. It was the kind of crowd she had dreamed about. But now that she was standing in front of it, she wasn't sure if she could do it. But then she thought about everything she had overcome, every step she had taken to get here. She couldn't back down now. Clara walked onto the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. The lights were blinding, and for a moment she couldn't see the faces in the crowd. But she could hear them, the murmurs, the anticipation. She sat at the piano, her hands shaking slightly as she placed them on the keys. Taking a deep breath, Clara began to play, and in that moment, everything faded away. The nerves, the doubt, the fear, it all disappeared as the music filled the air. It wasn't just the notes she played. It was everything she had fought for, everything she had worked for, all coming together in that one moment. When she finished, the audience erupted into applause. Clara felt a rush of relief, of joy, but most of all she felt proud. Proud of the journey she had taken, of the woman she had become. Clara wasn't just a maid anymore. She was an artist, and this was only the beginning.